Hello, my name is Brandon, and welcome to The Bridge, a music podcast where me and my friend Zach discuss the latest albums in hopes to bridge fans to bands. I have not a latte today. Today I have an Americana. What are you joining us with today?
I've already drank 3 coffees today, so
Okay,
green tea and honey.
okay. No, that sounds great. I think that's
Uh-huh.
it. Well, if you've been having that many coffees today, we'll see how you are today. Um, we're covering an English duo, Sleaford Mods. A somewhat grime, a somewhat punk, somewhat hip hop, somewhat electronic album called Spare Ribs, and they're pretty interesting, I would think.
Very post, they are the definition of the sort of post-music world or post-music landscape we currently exist in.
Yeah, they kind of have this idea. They take these modern ideas and pull them down to like some of their basic building blocks and rebuild from there. And it comes to creating like a pretty interesting, trancy, ranty, leftist punk album. It's kind of hard to really define.
Yeah, you can't really define it because it's assembled from a number of different genres. The most, obvious being punk.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of punk from the mid to late '70s, UK
Mm-hmm.
punk,
Mm-hmm.
and, electronic music. So from, the UK and like, house music especially. A lot of the tracks, they're not super climactic or anything like that, you know? There's sort of just a beat, and then there's a bit of an additive style where he adds, synthesizer, so on. Or in other cases, they'll have a beat, and then they'll add, like guitar chords. And
One of the main songs here has like a pretty nice little bass line that's basically in the background. I believe that was Shortcomings is what I'm thinking of. But they add these little flourishes to the bass. It's very minimalistic
Mhm.
in the structure.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
not
yeah.
a lot happening with the instrumentation on this album, honestly. It's pretty forward. There's actually a lot of similarities with hip hop, I think, with the way
Mhm.
that these songs are structured. You know, you got this beat, and this guy is just kind of rinsing poetry over the top of it. Very like UK grime, which is kind of like their pseudo rap scene, hip hop scene there. Um,
Okay.
so I got a lot of that kind of like taste and flavor on this whole album, where like they're kind of like living in this hodgepodge musical center where they're kind of picking and pulling from a lot of little different areas and ideologies, and they create this very unique sound that I think really caught my ears immediately.
Yeah, well, why don't we anchor the band in a bit of context, and maybe it'll clarify a little bit of what we've said so far.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so like you said, this band is Sleaford Mods. The lyricist and singer is the crusty Jason Williamson, and the instrumentalist is Andrew Fian, instrumentalist DJ.
Mm-hmm.
And they come from the Midlands in England, and so Jason Williamson has a very strong and stark Midlands accent that you would hear in that part of England,
Very strong.
and yeah, it's very strong. And I looked into it a little bit, and there is sort of like a collection of bands from around the Midlands,
Mm-hmm.
and they do something similar to what Sleaford Mods do. One band in particular is called The Streets, and anyways, there's a live album by The Streets, and there's a feature by Idols, who are a UK band, but they come from the south. I think they're from Bristol.
Okay.
And so, for people who maybe have heard of Idols, or some other bands from the UK, but then no Sleaford Mods or The Streets, that's why they sound so different, because they come from the Midlands. They also include a fair amount of, would you say, a fair amount of slang, like
A lot of jargon, a lot of
yeah.
slang, colloquialisms. Like it'll spin you around if you're not familiar with these.
Yeah, it's don't be surprised to hear the word wanker or hear him pronounce shite instead of shit. These sorts of things, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of like stuff that you'd have to kind of like Urban Dictionary, I would say.
Well, yeah, for anyone who's not from the UK, yeah, it can sort of throw you for a loop the first
Yeah,
time around.
absolutely. Some of them I'm kind of familiar with in general, they're being the more popular slang that I think is attributed to the English that you might be more familiar with. But then there's others that are some more deep cuts that might be hard to unravel right away. You might not quite understand what he's saying.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then, yeah, so the album in general, what was your takeaway from the album? The messages on the album, yeah, what you thought of it overall?
Well, before I listened to it, I had this expectation a little bit of like it was going to be like a post-punk band. It'd be a lot more groove with a little bit of an electronic flair. That's kind of what I was expecting going into this. I expected it to be a little abrasive because I had heard like 20 seconds of like I think it probably shortcomings, and it's kind of what piqued my interest and kind of directed me towards this just band. Before that, I had no idea these guys existed. Never heard of them before. They were kind of like their new release was coming out. Looked into them, kind of how I
Can I
um,
interject for a second just
sure,
to let people know? This is their 6th release too, by the way.
yeah, okay, okay.
Mhm.
My overall takeaway, I think we'll get to that. We'll get to that because it was a little lukewarm. I think
Mhm, yeah.
there was a lot of barriers to entry. Uh,
Yeah.
and then once you got in there, there was a sweet spot of where everything was really hitting, and there's a lot of interesting ideas going on. It's very unique. And then there was the half life came, and things became a little more tedious to me and a little harder to engage with, especially on the instrumental side.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, it's a very stripped down, minimalistic album as far as the instrumentals go, which
Right.
is intentional because it sort of elevates the lyrics as the centerpiece.
Right, and that's kind of like that hip hop structure where
Mhm.
like there's this bedding and then his rants, I guess you want to say these poetic rants are on top of very leftist views, anti Brexit kind of lyricism. That's kind of where that punk flavor comes in. A lot of that
Yeah,
political punk stances.
I would say that, whether you're from the right or the left, nobody gets out of this album alive, really. He sort of takes a shot
No,
at everybody.
he does. He does. There's a lot of like there's a quirkiness to this album and in his delivery and the way he gets his message across. And maybe that's because of his thick accent.
Mm, yeah.
It comes off that way. It also comes off like it's very endearing. I think I like the accent, and I think that kind of like makes it a little more endearing and me more accepting to it. But yeah, it came to a point where I really enjoyed certain songs like Mindy, like the Elocution, Mork and Mindy. I like Nudge It, Shortcomings. Those were all like my top tracks, and I think that's where and Fish Cakes. Those were the songs I felt they took their idea. They didn't betray what they're trying to do, but I think they were able to create more interesting and engaging song or soundscape within those songs where I think
Mhm.
some other songs didn't quite like instrumentally pull through and weren't exactly super engaging or hooky. Like they didn't really catch my flavor. But like his delivery and his lyrics and his like passion and the personality of it all was very engaging.
Mhm.
But I did get tired a bit of that electric bass in the background being very repetitive throughout the whole song, and it's just like it's times I was just like, there's not enough in this skeleton of minimalistic sounds to keep me super engaged.
Yeah.
But there were ones like Morgan Mindy, which sounds a little bit like that Billie Eilish song, "Bad Guy." That little beat,
Okay, yeah,
that little
yeah.
melody that they do. I really think there's a similar.
Yeah, that the instrumentation on that track is very similar to "Don't Write You" also.
Okay, okay. Well, what did you expect when you were going into this album?
I didn't know who the guys were, so I didn't really know what to expect, and so then I listened to it the first time, and it honestly was very different because it's so musically sparse
Hmm.
compared to most stuff that I listen to. And then I picked up on how they oscillate between these punk sounds and then anchor everything in an electronic bass. And then they actually have like a promo on YouTube, which is
Okay,
essentially an interview of the band interwoven with a COVID friendly live concert that they did.
okay.
So yeah, I sort of was able to get a better grip on the band after that. And during the live performance, Jason Williamson's doing his thing and spitting lyrics and do performing, and then Andrew Fern just has a laptop set up and he's sort of like sort
Yeah,
of
yeah,
bopping around in the background, sort of like a groupie. It's a little
yeah.
bit strange.
It,
Maybe
it,
if there was an audience, it would be different. But yeah, it was a bit odd.
I think that's a calling card of his because I watched a few of the music videos and I watched them perform live in studio. That might be what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
and in all of these instances, he just stands there and bobs his head. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like it's just kind of poking fun, I guess, because all his work is he creates the beat and stuff and like the music, and then he just hits a button and plays it, and he just kind of stands
Yeah.
there, like you said, like a groupie. But I think he owns it. I think that's kind of funny, really.
Yeah. Yeah. It was entertaining.
And then he just kind of lets the other guy go off on his impassioned rants. Um,
Yeah.
how did you feel about the like, minimal instrumentation? Because that's kind of where I had some of my hangups.
I think with some tracks, it's just the instrumentation is just too sparse.
Right. Um,
Like, what are some tracks that you consider the instrumentation to be too sparse?
even though I liked Shortcomings, that kind of like snare electric bass beat just kind of like got really grating near the end of it. Like the bass itself, like the electric bass on the song was kind of saves it a lot. It's
Uh
like
huh.
really that's the really gummy part and really kind of hooks the song. But like the drum in the background really kind of grated after a while. I thought stuff like Out There and Top Room didn't really pique my interest. All Day Ticket or Thick Ear, like they kind of like pull back the instrumentation a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. So, I had a different experience with Out There, but starting with Shortcomings. Yeah, this track is essentially the first track on the album. There's like a brief interlude or not interlude, but prelude that that kicks the album off, and then we get into Shortcomings, and very much it announces what the band is.
Mhm,
Essentially, sort of the spoken poetry slash rap, because sometimes there's a rhyme scheme,
mhm,
and then this very sparse instrumentation that always incorporates an electronic bass, and then it'll add like hi-hats on it, or and then maybe like some synthesizers, and if it doesn't use the synthesizers, it'll use like a sort of, it sounds like a rhythm guitar.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And the Shortcomings is the case where, yeah, it uses these rhythm guitar effects, but yeah, the instrumentation doesn't really develop. It doesn't really go anywhere. It yeah, announces itself very early in the song, and then it stays that way the whole way through. And then the best parts of the song are in the lyrics, because this is one of the strongest lyrical tracks, in my opinion,
okay,
because there's a lot of play on words, and yeah, the track is called Shortcomings, and then he's oftentimes sort of the refrain of the song is he's going to get on his knees. He's got shortcomings. and it's this sort of British wit, you could almost say,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
saturates this song.
That reminds me, I believe when I was looking up some stuff, he's got a book of short stories. I think I've seen him reading some of the excerpts from it. And I think you can kind of tell that his writing is it's very skilled. It's very nuanced. And I think it would transfer pretty well to short story writing. But this is one of the more cleverly written songs, I think. The chorus is pretty good. A lot of the wit in here. And again, there's a lot of like that thick jargon, but it's very endearing, I think. I think it helps grab attention. I actually, I have to apologize. Out There was not one of those songs that I thought that. It was actually one of the first songs instrumentally that I really enjoyed and didn't think clashed very much with like kind of what they're trying to do and what they were delivering. I like the distant bellowing drum and kind of like in that song. It's like it's not quite drum, but like there's like this distant sound that's kind of like very hypnotic and like in the background that I really enjoyed.
Are you talking about Shortcomings?
And no, I'm talking about Out There. I was just saying how I misnamed that one. That wasn't actually
Yeah.
one of the ones I was talking about.
Okay, yeah. Well, since you bring up Out There, yeah, why don't we bring it up, because this is one of the, in my opinion, biggest tracks on the album. It's essentially the track where he goes after all the Brexiter people, yeah, and criticizes their anti-immigration stance. Musically, like you were saying, it has this really cool, it has this cool bass line. It's I don't know. It's like almost you'd hear late at a like a after hours nightclub or something. I said
Yeah,
it sounds. I have written down. It sounds opium injected.
it sounds like you're listening to a song playing inside the club from outside the club.
Yeah.
That's that like bass line kind of sounds a little hollowed out
Yeah.
and like a little reverberated, and it really comes out nice. I thought it was one of the better musical choices and soundscapes they went with on the album.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of my favorite tracks instrumentally. To go back to the lyrics, we should also mention that this album is very explicit. There's a lot of profanity. This track in particular has one of the more crass images on the whole album. This image of the horse, and I won't go into any further gory details. But
Let the listeners more by curiosity lead them down and find it.
yeah, but if you do check out the album, yeah, you've been warned about Out There.
So did you come away positively feeling on this album?
For me, it's hard to say, because the album is not like an album I would go to. It's not an album I'm gonna probably listen to from front to back again. But there's certainly a couple songs that I'll probably keep in my rotation, at least for the next little while.
Right.
And I also feel bad saying that, oh, I wouldn't go back to the album, because in my opinion, it's paced very well. Even though the instrumentation doesn't always please me, it does have. They're very aware about having sort of more of punkish instrumentation, and then they change speeds, and then they go really deep into the deep house sound that is on Out There, for instance.
Right. I didn't come away negative. I think there's actually a good handful of songs off of this album that are really good, and I think encapsulate the sound that they want to have. I just don't think it's consistent through the album. I think there's a little bit of the sound and ideas wearing thin by the end of the album.
Two examples that I'll throw out are Top Room and All Day Ticket. Those songs, they're just so cut down. It annoys me, They're just hard skips for me. I just don't want to listen to them.
Nothing was super hard skip, but like also they didn't really they don't motivate re-listens from me. I think I walk away from this album cherry picking a few songs and put them in a playlist here and there, and I think I'd be pretty happy with those songs.
Yeah.
They definitely like deliver on them, and like this album kind of made me want a little more, and maybe to go back through their back catalog a bit and figure out where like their kind of like magnum opus is, because
Well,
there's a sound here and an idea here that I think is really really interesting and really compelling. I just don't think they always pull it off to its peak potential.
well, what track would you say is the peak track on the album for you?
Maybe Nudge It.
Nudge It. Okay.
Maybe Nudge It or Mork and Mindy.
I
Uh,
have Mork and Mindy as being the pinnacle
right,
of that,
right,
which is appropriately placed sort of in the middle.
right, right. I think this also is like their biggest hit song.
Uh,
When you go to Spotify, it's like their number one. And I think when I was reading up about it, it's like it's charting in Britain. So this is like I think the song they're kind of universally like writing.
yeah, and it's a sort of a sad song. I think it's about Williamson's childhood
Hmm.
and growing up in a broken family and sort of in the suburbs of a working class house. And there's this really sad image that the song ends on. He refers to dying dandelions and bumblebees, and it's sort of like this barbed vision of yeah, an idyllic existence.
I was a big fan of like their features. On the two tracks that they go with features, which one of them is Mork and Mindy and the other one is Nudge It. I thought she added a lot to diversity of the album. Billy Normanders on this track, I think she adds a lot. Just having like someone sing an aspect of the song, a new voice, and then there's a lot more space on this track. I think that kind of takes away some of my issues where like there's a lot more variety in the instrumentation because there's like singing, that's like another
Mhm.
layer.
Yeah.
And then it's someone that's not his voice, you know. Same thing with Amy Taylor, which I thought was kind of cool because she was featured on the last album we covered. That's the same singer who sung the "In Spite of Ourselves" with Viagra Boys.
Okay, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
she's an Australian. So this song is pretty interesting. Nudge It is who I'm talking about now. It's kind of interesting because she's an Australian, and they're very thick British. So like they're both on the same song, and it's like tickling my ears a little bit for both these accents to be so prevalent on the song.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's a nice harmony on this song because they both sing at the same time towards the end. It makes a really nice harmony.
right, right, and that's not betraying the sound they're going for, but also like adding a little flourish on top of it to like keep the idea fresh and moving. And that's where I would like to see a little bit more on some other tracks. So
Mhm.
I think Nudge It and Mork and Mindy are examples of like peak versions of this idea, which is very unique. Like
Mhm.
it's not something I would be able to compare to initially. Like I said, there's a little bit of a hip hop flair going here with the structure, with
Mhm.
the kind of the ranting and the poetics over top, even though it's not a lot of rhyme schemes. There's a lot of like wordplay,
Mhm.
which you would see.
Yeah.
And there's definitely like that grime influence that European hip hop, even though that's not quite the one to one comparison, but that's kind of like Stormzy in that. And I can definitely hear like a bit of flavor of that on these tracks. So like while this is like punk electronic, I think it's defined as on like Wikipedia. I think that sells it a little short.
Uh-huh, yeah, that's a good point.
I think the genre is a bit more complex, and I think this album is worth listening to experience the sound because I think this is unique, and I think that people who are looking for a new unique sound or interested in that kind of culture, I think will find a lot of interest on this album, in spite of some of its flaws, because I think it's a very personality chock full, brimming with personality, I would say.
Yeah, it's like a working class man's album, you know? It's like an album sang by like a street fighting man, like just somebody you find out on the streets. I think that I read a quote somewhere that Williams had said, you know, he doesn't swear on the album for the sake of profanity. He just swears because that's how he speaks anyways.
Yes, and that comes off a lot in his writing, with a lot of colloquialisms and jargon and stuff. It's a lot of like he's writing. Well, he's got a very poetic writing, but it's also grounded in this very urban language.
And sort of like what you would imagine someone who lives in the Midlands in England or living in an industrial town, that's how they would speak. It's very authentic in that sense. And so for someone, especially like you and me, who don't come from the UK,
Hmm.
yeah, it's sort of one of the more endearing and sincere parts of the album.
Absolutely, I would agree with that.
That being said, and sort of to build on what you were saying about Nudge It, uh, yeah, sort of living up to the reputation of Brits, the album is pretty chatty, you know? It's really lyrically dense, which
Hmm.
can be fatiguing at times, especially when there's not a catchy hook or the group doesn't really seem like they're totally hung up on using choruses all the time. Some tracks don't have a chorus.
Not some tracks don't, some do, and they are pretty interesting when they do have them. I think their chorus work is pretty decent. It's not like a bubblegum pop chorus, but
Mhm.
like they got these mantras they repeat a lot. It kind of adds to a little bit of the hypnotic trance of the instrumentation at times. The ability to just keep talking and keep ranting and keep going. There's a little bit of a trance hypnotic feature to some of these tracks.
Yeah, well, "Don't Rate You" would probably be, like, a great example of what you're talking about, which is the penultimate song on the album,
Mhm.
and, yeah, he has this, verse that he reiterates, sort of that functions as a chorus, "I don't rate you," and essentially he's talking about not being prejudiced towards people, you know? That song, it's got a lot it is sort of, in my opinion, perhaps the most dense, most complex track, on the album musically,
Mhm.
and it incorporates hi-hats, it has sort of muffled bass line, it uses synthesizers, it sort of brings everything all together, and then the synthesizers add this texture that he plays with throughout the song.
Right. That was definitely one of the songs that like trance moment where like I stopped hearing the lyrics and altogether, and it's just kind of like we're just in this little zone of like head bobbing.
Yeah, in my opinion, Nudge It, Out There, and Don't Write You are
Hmm.
probably my favorite tracks on the album. However,
Hmm.
you said you liked Elocution as
I
well,
did
which
like
I
that one.
and it is a good song, but maybe you can, explain a little further?
Oh, Kusha, I enjoyed the message in that song. Like he's not a big fancy talker. That's kind of like the whole idea is that he's this elegant speaker or anything, but you know he does his thing. I like the minimum rhythms on here, the groove and bass line and the electric drums. The chorus here is strong. It was a nice 3 minute song. You know, it was just kind of like it hit nice beats. It did well with the ideas they were doing. I think it was one of the higher delivering tracks here.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's definitely one of the more sparse tracks. Like it really emphasizes his voice, the lyricism, which, you know, sort of fits the theme of the song, I guess, in a way, elocution.
Hmm.
But yeah, like you said, the song's about how he doesn't sound like somebody from Oxford who wears tails when he goes out to a cocktail party in the evenings or whatever.
Right. So how would you say you came away from this album? How would you kind of recommend this to people who are listening?
It's sort of hard to say who this album is made for. You could say like, yeah, if you characterize the album as being a part of this rap tradition in the UK that I'm not
Yeah.
so well aware of.
Yeah, the grime is a new kind of emerging music that you'll hear people like Stormzy, who was a big name in that genre.
Mhm.
There's a lot of like tidbits taken from that, I think. I think there's a bit of inspiration here. It's not quite rap and it's not quite hip hop in the sense that you might be more familiar with, but the structure of the songs kind of fit in there. the heavy lyricism. It's more poetic than rhyme scheme. They're kind of like cousins.
Okay, yeah. If I was gonna recommend it to anybody, if you're into like old school UK punk like Sex Pistols, who else? The Ramones, check them out.
I think that if you're a fan of like the Viagra Boys and Idols and that we were mentioning last week, in that kind of like UK punk scene that's currently going on there, I think these guys are an interesting corner in that
Yeah,
that I think is very will have a lot of merit to listening to. I think this is a band I think everyone should definitely give it a listen. You know, I'm
yeah.
not promising you that you're going to walk away from the album in love, but I think you'll come away definitely having experienced something you hadn't experienced before.
Well, they're representative of a scene,
Hmm.
the Midland scene, like the northern England scene.
Right.
And so I think that that's sort of where the value lies in checking out the band, especially if you're coming from outside the UK. Because even looking at the statistics on Spotify, they don't seem like they've sort of crashed the American shores yet. Everyone that
No,
seems to be listening are in the UK or in continental Europe.
that's kind of an issue for a lot of these grime-ish bands as well. There's a lot of
Mhm.
those British rappers who are actually struggling a lot to also do that. There's definitely like kind of a conflict there, and I'm curious why Western listeners are so apprehensive.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say, but in a way, if these guys sort of bumped up the instrumentation a little bit, I think it would maybe appeal to especially people in the States and in Canada a little bit more, because
It's very unique what they're doing, uh,
Mhm,
and you don't want to like over add because I think they'll take away a bit from the minimalism.
for
But
sure.
some better sounds, a better soundscapes, a few better hooks with the drums, a little more elaborate here and there. It's just a little sprinkles here and there. I think would do a lot. I don't think it needs to be an overhaul.
No, no, definitely not, but, sort of dial back a little bit on the density of the lyrics and then add that to the instrumentation,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I think, it would improve their sound.
Right. You need to add a little bit of salt to the soup is what I think needs to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, good metaphor.
What would you rate this album?
So, it's a little bit hard to say because it's one of those albums where it deserves a certain score, but then my personal score is lower.
So how about you give me both? How you're
Okay.
kind of more subjective and you're more objective.
Okay, so my personal score would be more in the 6 range
Hmm.
because like I said, it's not an album that I'm gonna return to, honestly. It's an album where I'm gonna probably listen to the 3 tracks that I listed,
Hmm.
just a few moments ago, and then, forget the rest. However, as an album, it has a very clear narrative. I like the lyrical ideas on it, I like the wordplay, so the writing is A plus. And then the instrumentation, I mean, there's good ideas, but it's too sparse, but also, like I said earlier, at the same time, the band paces the album instrumentally very well.
Hmm.
And so for that reason, I'd have to give it a 7, you know? It's better than, a fair number of albums.
I was thinking we might not agree this week, coming into this. They kind of won me over the last day and a half.
Mhm.
When my first few listens were kind of struggling, and I was kind of hovering around a 5, honestly.
Yeah.
But I think that's too low, and I think I match your sentiment with like the 6 to 7 range.
Yeah.
I think the uniqueness kind of buffs it a bit for me towards like the 7, but some of my issues and critiques kind of bring it down to like that mid range, so like a 6.5. If we're gonna add some decimals in here, it's kind of the range I'm feeling. So I agree with you actually. So I think that's a little surprising. I thought you might take to this a little more than I did.
Yeah, it's just the album, even though it's only 41 minutes or 42 minutes, it sort of feels long, like toward after a while, I'm sort of waiting for it to end.
Yeah,
And
it's because they're like again, the instrumentation doesn't switch up enough to like keep you really in there the whole time, and
uh-huh.
the lyrics are really dense as well. So there's a lot of like that kind of homework, especially because sometimes it's hard to understand what he's saying because the accent is thick to
Uh-huh.
Western listeners, and there's a lot of jargon you might not understand as well. A lot of political, the political environment is also probably one you're not familiar with. There's a lot of like the political jargon there as well. So it can be a little, it can add to the length a little bit or feel longer because there's more checking lyrics and a little more homework is along with the album. So I think that makes it feel a little bit longer. I think the same thing happened with Brass, where Brass felt a little longer because of how
Mhm.
much like lyrical content you had to engage with.
Yeah, I agree. And but at the same time, their sound is so unique
Hmm.
that you can't give it a 5. Like
No,
it's above average album, you know? They really carved their own space in the music landscape.
they know what they're doing, and I think a lot of these critiques that we have with the instrumentation are very conscious and intentional choice by them.
Mhm.
I don't think that necessarily pans out the way they want it to. Sometimes,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's I wish there was almost more ideas
right,
because they've only their first record came out I think in 2011 or 2012 and they've already got 6 records out. Like, why don't you just pump the brakes a little bit and maybe flesh out some more of your ideas?
right. I think
Yeah.
there could be, but on this album alone, as we're reviewing, I think there's a bit more that needs to be added. Like I said, the little bit of salt to the soup needs to be put in here.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
So next week we haven't quite decided on our next album, but we'll be looking into it. Every Friday, new albums are dropping. I'm listening to a lot of singles more than I used to. I'm kind of getting a little more of an ear for the what's coming down the pipe. I'm excited about a few albums.
I
Go ahead.
typically don't listen to singles, but I have to agree that it does make me excited for upcoming records.
Hmm.
I also hate this there's sort of this idea now where people are just releasing songs, a couple songs here, a couple songs, just drop a track, and then it takes forever to get an album, and it's just it bums me out a little bit.
Right. When you see the trailers, you want to know what's coming. Yeah, within a month.
Yeah.
That's true. I think some bands, if you're kind of stuck with certain labels, you need to definitely release singles. I think a lot of bands are kind of in that marketplace. They do need to find and put their music out and get it on playlists and stuff. So I can't blame them too much.
No, I get it, but as a listener, I love an album, you know.
Absolutely, I
Yeah.
agree. I'm an album listener, but not everyone is. So it's kind of interesting to sometimes judge albums based on marketing strategy. Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that will be it for this week, I believe. Thank you for tuning in. Next week we'll be back again. I say listen to Spare Ribs. I would say.
Yeah, check it out. At least the songs that we mentioned specifically and sort of went deep on.
I think you listen to a track or two, one of the singles, one of the music videos. I think you'll get an idea if you're gonna like it or not. I don't, dip your toe in. I'd say Nudge It or Mork and Mindy's. I think we both agree probably the best entry points. They're probably like the peak of the ideas. Give those a try. Maybe walk away with a few songs for your playlist. I think that's the best spot for this album.
The guy Jason Williamson, the lyricist, uh, you'll hear his voice, but if you go and check out their YouTube channel or whatever, he's got this perpetual look on his face, like like he doesn't understand what you're saying. Like he just looks like he's in a constant state of contrary confusion.
I was listening to a little bit of an interview he's having for about 15 minutes where he was just going on about the political environment and about not voting and feeling helpless in the vote. Yeah, he's a political dude. He's got a lot to say. He's a good writer. He's a compelling speaker. I'm interested in hearing the next project. I think because I think there's definitely places to go here.
Yeah, I'll definitely check out their next record. I just hope they give it some time,
Yeah,
like bake
absolutely.
in the oven a little longer.
Well, I'll see you next week, and we're going to talk about our next album.
Looking forward to it.